If Miriam hadn't stepped outside for air that Thursday night, and if my daughter's husband hadn't chosen the parking lot of the Shoppers Drug Mart on Princess Street to make his phone calls, I would have gone home, put the kettle on, and been dead before the weekend. I am Frederick Alcott. I am 67 years old, and I live on Maplewood Drive in Kingston, Ontario. I have lived there for 31 years. My wife Dorothy and I bought that house in 1992 for $185,000, which felt like an impossible amount of money at the time. We had just come back from a camping trip to Algonquin Park, and Dorothy had fallen in love with the big maple in the backyard. She said it looked like something out of a painting. She was right. It did. Dorothy died 16 months before any of this happened. A stroke. She was 64 years old, and she had been healthy her entire life, or so we thought. She went to bed on a Sunday night in May, the windows cracked open, because we still hadn't turned on the central air, and she never woke up. I found her at 6 in the morning when I went in to ask if she wanted coffee. 39 years. We had met at the University of Waterloo in the fall of 1982. She was studying environmental science. I was in civil engineering. We had argued about a group project assignment, and she had been so completely right about everything that I asked her for coffee to apologize. We were married 9 months later. After she was gone, the house felt wrong. Not empty, wrong. The right word matters. Empty would have been manageable. Wrong was something else. Every room had been designed around 2 people, and suddenly there was only one, and the house seemed to notice. My son lived in Calgary. He called when he could. My daughter lived 20 minutes away in Napanee with her husband and their 2 kids, and in the months right after Dorothy's funeral she came by often, bringing groceries I didn't need, asking questions about whether I was sleeping, whether I was eating, whether I'd thought about getting the gutters cleaned before winter. I told her I was fine. I wasn't fine. But I didn't know how to say that out loud, so I said I was fine, and she went back to Napanee, and I sat alone in the kitchen and tried to remember what the point was. A retired civil engineer doesn't have a lot of places to go. I had spent 32 years with the Ontario Ministry of Transportation, planning bridge expansions and highway interchanges, and then one day I stopped and there was nothing. Dorothy had kept our social life alive. She was the one who made plans, remembered birthdays, suggested dinner parties. Without her, I was adrift in a way I hadn't expected. It was my family doctor who suggested volunteering. He knew the coordinator at a Veterans Employment Support Center, connected to the local Legion on Johnson Street. They ran skills workshops for veterans transitioning out of service, helping them get trade certifications, write resumes, understand what their military experience translated to in civilian terms. They needed people with professional backgrounds. I had spent 3 decades managing infrastructure projects. I knew how to read blueprints and write technical reports and explain complicated systems to people who hadn't spent their careers inside them. I went on a Thursday evening in September just to see. I stayed for 3 hours and came back the following Tuesday. Within a month I was going every Tuesday and Thursday, from 6 in the evening until 9 or so. It was the only part of my week that felt like it had a shape. After my shifts, I started stopping at the Shoppers Drug Mart on Princess Street. It was on my way home, and I had a standing prescription for blood pressure medication I picked up every 4 weeks. The first few times I went in, I barely noticed the woman at the pharmacy counter. She was in her mid-40s, dark-haired, efficient, not unfriendly but not exactly warm either. She processed my prescription without a lot of conversation, which I respected. I was the same way. It was a night in late October when I first actually talked to her. I came in after a long shift, and I was looking for something on the shelves, some kind of anti-inflammatory for a shoulder I'd been ignoring for weeks, and I couldn't read the packaging because the light in that aisle was dim and I'd left my reading glasses in the car. She appeared beside me without being asked, read the labels out loud, explained the differences between 2 of them in about 30 seconds, and went back to the counter. Efficient. Precise. The kind of person who knows what they're doing and doesn't need to make a production of it. I asked her name as I was paying. Miriam, she said, Miriam Ashby. I introduced myself. She nodded the way people do when they're being polite but don't have time for more. I said goodnight and went home. The following Thursday I came in and brought 2 cups of Tim Hortons. Black, no sugar for me, and I guessed on hers. She raised an eyebrow when I set one on the counter. I saw you finishing a late shift last week, I said. I thought you might want something hot." She looked at the cup for a moment, like she wasn't quite sure what to do with it. "I take mine with one cream," she said finally, "but thank you." I brought cream the next time. After that, she started putting it together herself when she saw me come through the door. We fell into a routine. I came in Thursday evenings. She had a cup ready. We talked for a few minutes while she processed my prescription, or sometimes a bit longer if the pharmacy was quiet. She was a careful talker. She didn't overshare, didn't fill silence with chatter. When she spoke, it was because she had something to say. I liked that about her. She told me, over several weeks and in pieces, that she had worked for 12 years as a fraud analyst at a major life insurance company. She had specialized in disability and income replacement claims, identifying patterns that didn't add up, inconsistencies between medical records and billing, policies that had been taken out right before a suspicious injury. She was good at it. She had a way of looking at a file and knowing, before she could say exactly why, that something was wrong. 3 years before I met her, she had been assigned to a medical case involving a network of medical clinics submitting inflated billing codes to several provincial plans simultaneously. It took her 18 months to build the file. When she submitted her findings, she expected action. Instead, she was called into a meeting with her department head and told the case was being closed. The clinics had significant community profiles. The optics were complicated. She refused to let it go. She escalated to the provincial insurance regulator. That was in October. By January, she was gone, packaged out with a separation agreement and a non-disparagement clause. "I thought about fighting it," she said one evening, leaning against the counter with her coffee. "But I had my son to think about, and by the time I had enough set aside for legal fees, the moment had passed." She had retrained as a pharmacy technician. It wasn't what she'd planned, but it was work she could do well, and the schedule was more predictable. Her son, Eli, was 17 and wanted to study medicine. She was putting everything she could toward that goal. "I'm the only parent he's got," she said. "His father left when he was 3. So I don't really have the option of getting it wrong." She said it matter-of-factly, not looking for sympathy. That was Miriam. She told you the truth about things and then moved on. Around the same time, my daughter started coming by more often. It had been gradual, the way these things are. She began showing up on Sundays, then on Sunday and Wednesday, then sometimes a third day. She brought casseroles, offered to help with laundry, asked careful questions about my finances. Had I updated Dorothy's beneficiary information on my RRSP? Had I thought about what would happen to the house if something happened to me? Was I managing my medications properly? I thought she was being thoughtful. She was my daughter. She had her mother's careful way of asking questions. Her mother's way of making concern look like conversation. I told her yes to everything, and felt grateful that she was there. Her husband came with her sometimes, but he never came inside. He would stay in the driveway, scrolling his phone, engine running, waiting for her. I had never warmed to him, not since their wedding 7 years earlier, but I had made peace with that. You don't choose your daughter's husband. You make it work. One Sunday afternoon in November, my daughter was in the kitchen making tea, and she said to me, without quite looking up from the kettle, that she had made me a doctor's appointment. "What kind of doctor?" I asked. She had noticed some things, she said. I had called her by the wrong name twice. I had forgotten we had plans for lunch. She had mentioned it to my family doctor, and he had recommended I see someone who specialized in cognitive assessment. "I don't remember calling you the wrong name," I said. She looked at me then with an expression I couldn't read. "That's what worries me, Dad," she said. She drove me the following Monday to a clinic in the West End. The doctor was a man in his 60s with a quiet, professional manner. He asked me questions. The year, the Prime Minister's name, how many words I could remember from a list he read aloud. He asked me to draw a clock set to 2:10. I drew it. The numbers were in the right places. The hands were correct. He wrote in his notes for a long time. When he finally looked up, he said he was seeing signs of early-stage cognitive decline. He used the phrase mild cognitive impairment. He said it could progress. He recommended a medication. He spoke to my daughter for several minutes, as though I had already left the room. I sat in the car on the way home, feeling something I hadn't felt since Dorothy died. Not grief exactly, more like the floor dropping out from beneath me. If I couldn't trust my own memory, what could I trust? That Thursday I went to my volunteer shift and then stopped at the pharmacy. I set Miriam's coffee on the counter and didn't say anything for a moment. She noticed immediately. She said, "What's wrong?" I told her about the appointment, about the diagnosis, about the clock I had drawn perfectly, and the list of words I had mostly remembered, and the doctor who had looked at me like I was already somewhere else. Miriam was quiet. She set her coffee down. She asked me what tests they had given me, and I described them as best I could. "And you got most of them right," she said. It wasn't a question. "Most of them," I said. "Yes." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she said, "Fred, who referred you to this doctor?" "My daughter arranged it," I said. "She made the appointment." Miriam nodded slowly. She asked for the doctor's name. I told her. She wrote it on a prescription notepad and folded it into her coat pocket, without explaining why. I didn't ask. What I didn't know, what Miriam told me weeks later, after everything was over, was what she had witnessed in the parking lot behind the pharmacy 2 weeks earlier. It had been a late shift, the third Thursday in October. She had stepped outside just before 9 o'clock to wait for her ride. The night was cold, maybe 4 or 5 degrees, frost already sitting on the parked cars. She was standing near the pharmacy's side door when she heard a man on the phone in the parking lot, not far from where she stood. She recognized him. She had seen him come in twice with my daughter, tall, broad-shouldered, always in an expensive-looking jacket that was slightly too young for him. She wasn't eavesdropping. She simply couldn't help but hear. He was talking loudly, the way people do when they've had a few drinks, and have forgotten their voice carries in cold air. She heard the old man, the house, power of attorney, the RRSP, move him somewhere safe. A figure just over $500,000. Her training hadn't gone anywhere. It clicked on automatically, the same way it always had. She found her phone in her coat pocket and opened the voice memo app and set it quietly on the low wall beside her. She heard him say, "The debt isn't going to wait, and she's not going to figure it out on her own, and we just need the paperwork, and once the paperwork's done, it's straightforward." He ended the call, got into a silver SUV, and left. Miriam stood there for another minute. Then she picked up her phone, stopped the recording, and listened back. She had 3 minutes of audio, clear enough to make out every word. She told me later she sat with it for 2 weeks. She knew she should report it. She also knew what had happened the last time she had reported something, and trusted the right people to handle it. She had lost her career and spent the next year rebuilding from scratch. But she also checked the doctor whose name had come up in our pharmacy system when my daughter had first called in about my prescriptions. She knew how to search the College of Physicians and Surgeons of Ontario database. She had done it professionally for years. She found 2 prior complaints involving capacity assessments of elderly patients. Both had been withdrawn. She made a note. The Thursday I came in looking hollow and told her about my diagnosis. She had been carrying all of this for 14 days. She had been trying to decide whether I would believe her. 2 evenings after that, she said, "Fred, I need to show you something. Can we talk somewhere quiet?" There was a Tim Hortons half a block down. We walked over after I picked up my prescription. She ordered nothing. I ordered a tea I didn't drink. She put her phone on the table between us. She explained what she had seen in the parking lot. She told me about the recording. She told me about the complaints she had found. She told me she had recognized the man from when he had come into the pharmacy with my daughter. I sat there and listened. When she finished, I said, "That's my daughter's husband." She said, "I know." I said he wouldn't. She wouldn't. Miriam said, "I need you to hear the recording first." She pressed play. I had known that voice for 7 years. He had stood beside my daughter at their wedding on a bright August afternoon and shaken my hand and told me he was honored to be part of the family. I heard. The RSP alone is over $500,000. That's not even counting the house. She signs as primary beneficiary, and once he's assessed as incapable, we file for guardianship. It's not complicated, it just takes time. I heard the doctor is on board. He owes me, he's not going to be a problem. I heard she doesn't know about the rest of it. She thinks it's a care plan. That's fine. That's better, actually. Cleaner. I pressed my hands flat on the table. They were shaking. "My daughter," I said. "What does she know?" Miriam said, "From what I heard, she knows about the plan to get power of attorney. She set up the doctor's appointment, so she knows about the assessment. But he said she doesn't know about the rest. whatever the rest is. I looked out the window. Outside on Princess Street, people were walking past in their winter coats and toques, going wherever people go on Thursday evenings in November. Everything looked exactly the same as it always had. "What do we do?" I said. Miriam picked up her phone. "We go to the police, tonight." "I want to drive past my house first," I said. "I don't know why. Some instinct." She looked at me for a moment. Then she said, "All right." We took a cab. I gave the driver my address on Maplewood Drive and asked him to slow down when we turned onto the street. Miriam sat beside me and said nothing. When we came around the corner, the maple in the front yard was dark against the sky. The porch light was off. I always left it on when I was out. I registered that first. Then I registered the silver SUV parked half a block past my house, engine running, no headlights. The cab kept moving. I didn't speak until we were around the corner. "That's his car," I said. Miriam already had her phone out. We went to the Kingston Police Service station on Oak Hill Street. It was just after 10 o'clock. The officer at the front desk was young and took us seriously, which I hadn't quite expected, and then he called someone from the back. The detective who came out was a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and a direct manner that reminded me of a project supervisor I had worked beside for years. She led us into an interview room, sat down across from us, and said, "Start from the beginning." I started from the beginning. I told her about Dorothy, about the 16 months since she had died, about my daughter coming by more often, asking questions about the house and my RRSP and my will, about the doctor's appointment, the assessment, the diagnosis I had never believed but had been too shaken to dispute, about Miriam, about the parking lot. Miriam played the recording. The detective's expression didn't change much, but something behind her eyes shifted. She asked Miriam several careful questions about how the recording had been made, where Miriam had been standing, whether the man had known she was there. She listened to the answers without interrupting. She said, "Give me 20 minutes." She was back in 12. She told us she was sending officers to my house on Maplewood Drive. She was also sending officers to my daughter's address in Napanee, and to the address she had pulled for my daughter's husband, and she would be contacting the College of Physicians and Surgeons about the doctor whose name I had given her, and whose name Miriam had already written down. She looked at me steadily. She said, "Mr. Alcott, if you had gone home tonight, I don't think it would have gone well for you." I said, "My daughter is involved in this." She said, "I know, I'm sorry." I nodded. I didn't trust myself to say more. At 12:47, her radio crackled. 2 men had been taken into custody outside my house on Maplewood Drive. They had been sitting in the silver SUV. Officers had found 2 burner phones, a document that appeared to be a power of attorney form with my name already printed on it, and, in the glove compartment, a prescription bottle with the label removed, containing sedative tablets. My daughter's husband was arrested at his home in Napanee. My daughter was brought in separately. The doctor was arrested 3 days later. Investigators found records of 7 other patients, all elderly, all in Kingston or the surrounding area, who had received capacity assessments from him over the preceding 4 years. 6 of them had family members who had subsequently filed for legal guardianship. He had been running the same arrangement for years. I was not the first. Because of what Miriam had done, I would be the last. I did not go home that night. Miriam called her neighbor to check on Eli and brought me back to her apartment on Division Street. It was small and tidy, with Eli's hockey equipment in the hallway and a periodic table taped to the kitchen wall. Eli came out when he heard the door, looked at his mother's face, and without being asked went to put the kettle on. He was 17 years old, and he read a room better than most adults I had ever met. He handed me a mug and said, "Do you want to watch something? We've got the hockey game on PVR." I said, "Sure." We sat in the living room, and he put on the game and didn't ask me any questions, which was exactly the right thing to do. I sat there drinking tea and watching hockey and feeling like I had been taken apart and couldn't quite find all the pieces. The trial was 8 months later. My daughter's husband was charged with conspiracy to commit financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, fraud over $5,000, and conspiracy to administer a noxious substance. The 2 men who had been waiting outside my house were charged with criminal conspiracy. The doctor was charged with fraud, professional misconduct, and falsifying medical records. My daughter was charged with fraud over $5,000 and conspiracy to commit financial exploitation. Her lawyer argued she had not known about the men outside the house, had not known about the sedatives, had believed the plan was simply to establish a care arrangement and manage my finances. The Crown argued the distinction was academic. She had arranged a fraudulent medical assessment of her own father. She had helped prepare guardianship paperwork she knew was built on a false diagnosis. The jury agreed with the Crown. I sat in the front row for 3 weeks of testimony. Miriam sat beside me every day. The audio recording from the parking lot was played 4 times, once by the Crown, once by each defense lawyer, and once at the judge's request. My daughter's husband's voice filled the courtroom each time. By the 4th playing, it had stopped affecting me. Or I had stopped letting it. On the day of sentencing, the judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement. I said yes. I had written it at Miriam's kitchen table at 2 in the morning 3 weeks earlier and revised it 11 times. I stood, and I faced my daughter across the courtroom, and I said, I drove you to your first day of school on Maplewood Drive. I taught you to skate on the Cataraqui River on a Saturday morning, in January when it was -17, and you cried for an hour, and then made it all the way across the ice by yourself, and turned around with the biggest smile I had ever seen. I sat in the auditorium for your university convocation. I danced with you at your wedding. When your mother died, you were the first person I called. Not because it was protocol, because you were my daughter, and you were the only person left in the world who had been part of everything we built. I paused. The courtroom was quiet in a specific way, not silence exactly, but stillness. I said, I did not call you that morning to report a crime. I called you because I was 66 years old and I had just lost my wife and I needed my child. And while I was sitting in that house over the following months, trying to hold myself together, you were sitting across from me at my own kitchen table convincing me that my mind was going. You arranged for a doctor to tell me I was losing my grip on reality. You watched me believe it. My daughter was crying. She had been crying since the first week of the trial. I said, and while I was sitting in that house believing something was wrong with me, your husband had 2 men parked on my street waiting to make sure that if I refused to sign anything, I would not be in a position to refuse again. I stopped. I looked at her for a long moment. I still love you, I said. I don't know what to do with that, but I will never trust you again, and that is entirely your doing. My daughter's husband received 5 years on the conspiracy and fraud charges. The 2 men received 3 years each. The doctor received 4 years and had his medical license permanently revoked. My daughter received 18 months to be served in the community, given that she had cooperated fully once she understood the full scope of what her husband had arranged. She called me from the courthouse steps the afternoon of sentencing. I let it go to voicemail. I have not listened to it. 2 years have passed since that Thursday night in November. I am still on Maplewood Drive. The maple in the backyard is coming into leaf again for the 3rd spring since Dorothy died. I still volunteer at the Legion Resource Center every Tuesday and Thursday. I still take the same blood pressure medication. Miriam and Eli moved into the upstairs rooms last September. It made more practical sense than either of us said out loud for months. She had been driving across the city to check on me after her shifts for most of the year, and Eli had started appearing on weekends to help with whatever the house needed. And eventually I told them that the 2 upstairs bedrooms were sitting empty, and it was a waste of space and warmth for everyone to keep going back and forth across town. Eli started first year at Queen's University this past fall, medicine. He wants to go into geriatrics, which struck me as both deeply ironic and exactly right. I cover his tuition and residence. This is not charity. Miriam argued with me about it for 3 weeks. I told her what I meant. Her son is going to spend his life helping people who have been misled about what is happening in their own bodies, and if I can make that path easier, then I am not going to let a conversation about money get in the way. Every morning now I come downstairs and the kettle is already on, because one of them has gotten up before me. There is usually something on the counter, toast or the newspaper, or a note from Eli about what time he'll be back from campus. Small things. The kind of thing that makes a house feel like there are people in it who intend to stay. I think about Dorothy often. I think about the 39 years we spent building a life on Maplewood Drive, the camping trips and the disagreements, and the Sunday mornings reading the Globe and Mail on the back porch with the maple above us. Losing her was the worst pain I have ever known. Some losses you don't recover from. You just learn to carry them differently over time. What happened with my daughter is a different kind of loss. She is still alive. She is somewhere trying, I think, to figure out who she is outside of the choices she made. Maybe one day I will pick up the phone when she calls. I don't know yet. The wound is still too tender, and I am still too uncertain of what I would say. But I know this. The woman who saved my life was a pharmacy technician working a Thursday night shift who had every reason to keep her head down and let someone else take the risk. She had done the right thing once before and been punished for it. She chose to do it again anyway, because of a cup of coffee I brought her every week and a voice that carried too far across a cold parking lot. I think about how close the whole thing was, how many small things had to line up in exactly the right order. A late shift, a side door, a cold night where sound travels clearly. Miriam says she was just in the right place at the right time. She says she only did what any decent person would do. I don't agree. What Miriam did required courage, and it required someone who understood, from hard experience, what it looks like when a system is being used against the very person it is supposed to protect. She recognized what was happening to me because she had spent 12 years of her career learning to see exactly that. And when she saw it, she didn't look the other way. Not this time. I was lucky enough to bring her coffee. Pay attention to the people around you, not just the people who share your name or your bloodline. Pay attention to the person who shows up consistently, who listens when you talk, who notices when something has shifted. Family is not always the people you were born to. Sometimes it is the person who steps outside for air on a cold November night and decides that what she overhears is too important to keep to herself. I am 67 years old. I still live on Maplewood Drive. The maple is in leaf. There are 2 people upstairs, and one of them is going to be a doctor, and the other one takes her coffee with 1 cream. That is enough. Some mornings, it is more than enough.